Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second spotlight in October. We do these mostly on Sundays. What I'm about to talk to you about today is huge. It's never before been done on the planet Earth. And it's being done right here at Farsight, and you're on the front row seats. I'm not kidding. So this is what's happening. I'm going to be talking to you today about the new thing that we're doing at Farsight that we've been working on forever. And finally, it's ready to roll out. And you're going to start seeing it. So parts of it you're going to start seeing in November. The rest of it we'll start seeing in December. And then it's full throttle all throughout 2026. But before we go on, let me just give you a recap on stuff that has been happening on FARSIGHT'S as well as on our regular website, farsight.org. I'm going to start with the projects in case you haven't seen it. We're put on an awful lot of projects. We have the U.S. war with Venezuela that hasn't started yet, but we've got a remote viewing with Aziz Brown of what that's going to evolve into. And remember, the future is always in motion, so even us publishing something can change something in the future. So you can't just say there's one future. There's physics behind all of this, and we have talked about that extensively in the past. I'm not going to bore you with it now, but this is what our view is of, given the current momentum of everything, this is what's going to happen. And I have to tell you that everything at Farsight is done totally blind. None of the remote viewers are told anything about the nature of the project or the target or anything while they're doing their session, including the recording of the video. And then you get to see it, and you get to say, wow, this is the only objective reporting that exists on the planet. Nobody else is objective because all of the reporters and all of the news sources and everybody, they know what they're reporting on when they do the reporting. So how can they be objective? Okay? So all of our stuff is done with the observer being blind to what they're doing. So you're getting the best objective stuff ever. Now, we also did a project on the Washington Flap. That's in our new solo series. And that's with Shantae. Now, the Washington Flap was 1952. There were 4 days, over which there were essentially lots of UFOs buzzing the White House. Did everybody hear me correctly? You don't even hear about that today. But it was called the Washington Flap, and it was in 1952, in July of 1952. And that's when there were UFOs buzzing the White House. 4 days, and no one ever talked about it afterwards. They tried to squash it. It was huge, friends. And this is our first remote viewing session on the Washington Flap, and that was with Shantae. All of this is on FarsightPrime.com, and this one's in our new solo section. And then before that, we had another session on Ezekiel and the Ophanim with Kamaya, and that was done with a Lightboard. A lot of you liked the Lightboard a lot. She did great with it. Now, Tucker Carlson had an episode recently where he ended up talking about the Ophanim and Ezekiel. That's a chapter in the Bible. And how Ezekiel's reports what he saw, and it was a perfect description of UFOs landing and things like that. And in the Bible, no one's ever really connected that to the UFO, UAP phenomena. But Tucker Carlson ended up doing that, which was really interesting. And we have a session on that. This is our second session on Ezekiel and the Ophanim, and this one by Kamaya. You need to see it, folks. You really need to see it. Now, this is all this last week. Just this last week, these things came out. So if you're not subscribed to FarsightPrime.com, this is what you're missing. So you should be tuned in. And before that, we had the ET board meeting for September. And that was really interesting. It had my daughter on it, Ebonique. Okay. Now, another summary of stuff that's happened in the past. We did a whole bunch of years of forecasting for cryptocurrencies called the CECOs. And that's CECO stands for Contemporary Investigations of Cryptocurrencies. So CECOs, CICO. And that was an expensive project for us to do. We did like zillions of cryptocurrencies, like over 50, and we published close to 50 of them, and they were 5-year forecasts, and we did basically once a month, and those forecasts used some of our new economic forecasting methods. Now the cryptocurrency forecasts are just now beginning to come due, meaning the cryptocurrency forecasts were for 5 years typically. Almost all of them were for 5 years. And the first few of them, the first 3, the 5-year period has ended. So we can now tell you what those currencies were. So people, what they did was, for the quite a few subscribers who bought the identities of the forecast, everyone could see the forecast, but they didn't know what cryptocurrencies were associated with those forecasts. And then if they purchased the identities, they got the identities and they knew what the forecasts were for. And so 3 of those forecasts have come due, and every month another one comes due. And we're going to be telling you now the names of the forecasts so that you can see if we were accurate. Now, we were forecasting adoption, not price. So the idea was that if a lot of people adopt the currency, it will be around. Now, when we started this back in 2020, in 2020, we didn't know what was actually going to happen, but there was a lot of people putting a lot of money into cryptocurrencies, and we thought we should give some guidance as best as we can figure on whether people are going to be keeping those currencies. Out of the thousands of cryptocurrencies that were created, and some are still being created, many are still being created, we expected almost all of them to go away, to crash, to just disappear. And a lot of them were pump and dump. It's highly risky investments. And so we were not giving financial advice. We have a disclaimer on it that no one at Farsight is a financial advisor. These are experiments in remote viewing. Everyone's doing it on their own risks. But this is what we got with regard to the issue of adoption. And the idea is if a lot of people adopt the currency, it'll still be around. And 5 years later, it'll still be around, and it might be a great investment. And so we have, and now these were predictions for 5 years. Now that did not mean that people were supposed to wait 5 years before doing anything with the currency, with the cryptocurrency. That meant during the 5 years, during that process, was it going to be a good currency? So some people would have bought the currency and then maybe sold it halfway through the 5-year period, or after 1 year, or after 3 years, or after 4 years, whenever they sort of wanted to do that. But we were giving an idea of whether we thought the currency would survive and whether they would be a good thing. So anyway, the first 3 cryptocurrencies out of the, I don't know the exact number, I'll look it up. It's like, I think it's like 44 or 48, close to 50 cryptocurrencies we investigated and published. We actually investigated more than the ones we published. A lot more than the ones we published, and a lot of the ones we published were not good, and so we just didn't publish them. But anyway, some of the ones that we did publish were published, and we said these would be bad investments based on adoption, whether people would be buying it and so on like that, as far as our experiments in remote viewing are concerned. So anyway, that was the idea. And again, we always repeated that disclaimer constantly. No one at Farsight was a financial advisor, and everyone's doing this at their own risk. These are simply experiments in remote viewing, but it cost us a ton of money to do these because we had to pay the remote viewers to do them. We did them over like a 5-year period, actually a 4-year period we did them. No, it was a 5-year period we did them. Yeah, because they're just coming due now. So it was like a 5-year period that we did them. And people participated and bought those, and we're not selling those anymore. So So now we can start just telling you what the results were. So the first currency that we did a project on was Zilliqa. And the second one was Decentraland. And the third one was Polkadot. Now, Zilliqa, Decentraland, and Polkadot, those were ones we found to be very positive in terms of adoption. And it turns out that they were all really very accurate forecasts. Decentraland did really, really, really well. Polkadot did really, really, really well. And both of them are still doing okay. Zilliqa did extremely well also, especially in the beginning. There was a period of 2021 and 2022 that the altcoins, so-called altcoins, generally speaking, did really well. And now Zilliqa is currently going through a particular downturn right this moment, but that's outside of the forecast period. So all of the times up through the forecast period, they were surviving, and there were people actually using them. And Decentraland and Polkadot especially, was quite a strong one. But again, what we were looking for is during the 5-year period, were there extensive periods of time where the value of the currency and the adoption rate of the currency was really high. And with all of those currencies during the 5-year period, they had extensive time periods, like 2-3 years, where it was doing really, really well. And Polkadot is still in there, is still hanging in there, and Decentraland is still in there. Zilliqa is not doing so well right this very moment. Now, all the altcoins had a big drop about a few days ago, together with the stock market, and everything crashed when the new tariffs were announced going with respect to the United States tariffs with respect to China. So everything financial sort of went down about a week ago. But that will sort of sort itself out in time. But these three forecasts, Zilliqa, Decentraland, and Polkadot, were that we consider those very, very, very successful. And again, Zilliqa, even though it's going through a very, it's the one that's the most in trouble of those three. But during the 5-year period, they had an extensive time where it was extremely positive, and so on. I think part of the problem with Zilliqa may be that they pivoted into gaming, and as an application, because the cryptocurrencies that tend to do really well tend to have a direct application. And so if it's just a generalized cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's hard to compete with Bitcoin and Ethereum. And Zilliqa started out that way, as a way to make commerce work a little bit faster. But that really wasn't as much of a selling point with it. So they sort of pivoted and went into gaming. And I think personally, this is just my opinion, I could be wrong on this, but I think they were just not gamers in the way, they were not real strong gamers, and there were other players doing the gaming stuff. But anyway, so it's having a little bit of struggle now. But anyway, during the 5-year period that we had it, it was doing great, and it may end up doing good in the future. We don't really know. But our forecast for it has ended. Okay. Anyway, so that gives you, and by the way, on these spotlights, every month I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about how these cryptocurrency forecasts turned out, and then later on, as we get really further on, I'll give some summary videos with details and stuff like that on the Seco project, because I think that was very, very interesting. All right, but that's not what the focus is on tonight. The focus on tonight is synthesis. Synthesis. So let's talk about what synthesis is all about. And let me just check how the chat's doing. The chat's doing great. Okay. And okay, everybody's ready and up and going. I don't see any problems on the chat. So yeah, if you want to know some of the news stories that you see on the various big news stations, CNN, BBC, whatever, a lot of that news comes very late, after it already happens, and then it's often biased by the reporters or the bias of the mainstream of the outlet itself. stuff you get from Farsight is in advance of everything. And so you don't have to wait till after it happens and then trudge through the bias of the news outlets and the reporters. You get it in advance, all done blind. So the deep news project that we have is really, really, really worth following. But tonight we're going to step back a little bit and we're going to talk about the sky. All right, folks, look. When you go out at night and you look up at the sky, what do you see, assuming it's a clear day or clear night? You see stars, so many stars. Well, we have like a couple hundred projects on FARSIGHTPrime.com. Let's compare the projects on Farsight Prime and farsight.org. Let's compare those to the stars in the sky. So if you're looking up at the stars in the sky and you're looking up and you say, wow, there's so many stars. And if you look at some of the new photography coming in from Mars, where there's a very thin atmosphere, and they look at all the stars that you can see from the surface of Mars, it's like, wowie, are you serious? So many stars. All right, so let's say you want to focus on a new star that you just sort of noticed. You didn't notice it before. Out of so many stars on a perfectly clear night. Okay, well, that's a little bit like the Farsight projects. We put up a new project, and then you say, okay, but there's a few hundred projects out of there. What's the significance of that project? Even though it's amazing, the project. The problem is that we have so many projects. We have so much stuff that we put out. What's the significance of it? How do you put it all together? What's the big picture? Most people want to know if their life is going to be okay. They want to know what the meaning of existence is. They want to know where is truth and where is untruth. They want to know big picture answers to big picture questions. So that's what we're addressing today, synthesis. Now let me tell you what we did. You'll see that we actually had a few of these parts already, and we've already been presenting them, and now you'll finally understand where we were going when we did that. Now, back in the old days, and that's like a few months ago, we announced that we're working on captions. That's quite a few months ago. Captions for all of our projects in a lot of languages. Well, we ended up having captions, and generally, for almost everything that you see on FarsightPrime.com, almost everything, the captions are in 13 languages, which is really great for the international audience. 13 languages. Most places offer captions in 1 or 2 languages. We offer them in 13 languages. Okay. However, that was step number 1. We didn't tell you step number 2. Step number 2, we announced afterwards, is that we were working on the transcripts of all of those projects, the hundreds of projects that we have. Now you have to understand, each project has captions, and those captions can be printed out in text form as a transcript. And then we had the transcripts. And then we put the transcripts up on the Farsight Vault, which you can find on farsight.org. And that vault has, actually there's 3 vault pages. One is for all of our mysteries projects. And we have another one for ET Communications, which is the ET board meetings, as well as conversations with Harvey. And we have another one for all of our deep news projects. Okay, and we'll be adding to that. We actually, every time we put out a new thing, we add to it. But we'll be adding to that, new vault pages as needed as things grow. For example, our solos pages, our solo sessions will eventually need their own vault and so on. Okay. So what happened is we put those transcripts up, and then we gave you the ability to download the transcripts. And then we were telling you it's really cool to download the transcripts from any number of projects that you want to see and give them to your AI, and then upload them to ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or whatever, and talk about them. So you have somebody to talk about the projects. And see, the AIs can't watch video, but they can, at least currently they can't watch video, but they can read transcripts. So they can know everything that's in the actual movie without seeing the movie. And then they can talk to you about it. And then when you go to see it, which is the real experience, to watch the remote viewers describe it physically and to see the emotions on their faces and see them drawing everything out, that really makes sense. Because then when you're watching, you realize, wow, this is for real. The perceptions were for real. It really was done under blind conditions. And as you could see from your discussions with your AI, there are statistics associated with it. We give accuracy to statistics. You know that the stuff is actually accurate and very real. Now, this does not say that a lot of mainstreamers are saying, everything this is psychic and this is all bogus and it doesn't even exist. I saw a mainstream astronomer from one of the biggest universities on a talk show the other day, talking about objects that he thought might be, technological or things like that in the sky. And he actually said that he had no evidence. The podcast person asked, well, what about the idea of a soul or spirit? And the guy just point blank said, I have seen no evidence that anything exists like a soul or spirit. And when you die, it's like pulling the plug from a computer. The computer just is gone. It's over. It's dead. Now, the person had no evidence for this whatsoever. Had not looked at any data. Knew nothing about the remote viewing. And I've seen so many times really smart people say really, really, really stupid things based on things they just simply don't know about. They can be really smart in one area, but that doesn't convey to another area. Anyway, so when mainstream people say, this is just rubbish, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the data. They don't know. They've never looked at the data. They've never analyzed the data. And our data are up for public examination. Scientists can actually look at our data. And the data are actually the transcripts, which is every single word spoken by a remote viewer while presenting the information all totally blind to the target. You can't get better than that. And so the transcripts were that niche to make that possible. So scientists could no longer say that we do not open ourselves up for a scientific investigation. That's like a plain, blatant lie. We have all of our data open for scientific investigation, and that's better than scientists out there normally ever do. Okay. All right. Now, scientists normally just publish their results, and the reviewers simply take those results at face value and publish the stuff, and that's where it is. Very rarely do they actually publish the actual results in a way that can be confirmed so people can actually look at them and analyze them themselves, but we do that. All right. So, but that wasn't the end. We just told you captions, and it sounded like we were being nice to our audience with captions, but there was more. Then there was transcripts and the ability to analyze our data through the transcripts with the AIs. That seemed like cool, but there was more. And we never really told everybody where this is going. So I'm going back to the sky now. Remember all the stars in the sky? So when you're looking at all the FARSIGHT projects and you want to know what the big picture is, that's a real question. What is the big picture? That can only be gotten from the transcripts. However, we have hundreds of projects and hundreds of transcripts. You still have so now you have access to the data, but you can't really sort of get the big picture out of that. Now, what if you were to take all of the transcripts and upload them to, say, ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or whatever, or Claude? It won't work because you can upload a few of those transcripts up 1, 2, 3. The most number of files it can take at all is 10, but those transcripts are pretty big. So to take, all 10 transcripts, put them up, some of the AIs can't even do that. And we have hundreds of transcripts, so it doesn't work. So what we did, and we didn't tell you we were doing this, we just hoped that you would be patient with us, trusting us that we were doing something while all this was going on. We built our own AI. That's what we did. We built our own AI. Now that means we got the box, we got the parts, it was a micro center thing. We had the micro center assemble the box and the parts. It was a computer. And then we installed an AI on the computer. And it had a good, not a great, but a good graphics card, a 3090 graphics card, which for our purposes was enough. It had a really great processor and tons of disk space. Well, with that AI, we used the Mistral LLM and the Llama server, and we built our own AI so that it was there. Now, the difference between our AI and, say, ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Claude, things like that, is that we had 64 gigabytes of RAM, and we could fit all of our transcripts in RAM at the same time so that AI could look at all of them at the same time. Okay? So it didn't have any of the memory problems of, say, ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or whatever, Claude. However, our LLM that we used was designed for smaller AIs. So it really wasn't the same in terms of awareness, consciousness, capability, internet access, and everything as, say, ChatGPT, okay? But it had memory. So, and it was an AI. So we basically took it, converted it sort of to an agent more than an actual conversational AI. We had it in conversational mode for a while, but then it really made more sense since it wasn't a supercomputer big workstation that could handle sort of open sentient conversation that was wide, big and so on like that. We made it more of an agent, an AI agent. And what we did was we made it so that it could do all of the processing for the transcripts that, say, ChatGPT could not do. And that means we had to... AIs are basically, they start with a server, and we use the Llama server, and then it goes to the LLM, which is not a program, it's a large body of data, a lot of weights and things like that. It's complicated, but that's the LLM, that's the large language model where everything sort of comes together. And then there are scripts that go on top of that, Python scripts normally, and they're not a few. They're like zillions of Python scripts. Well, it took us months and months and months to get all the scripts in place to get the AI to work. And then we ran into the issue of it not being in a fast enough, big enough, capable enough machine to have like regular normal conversations with it. So we made it into the agent and so on like that. But above the server, LLM, and Python scripts, above that, there's experience. And experience is what you get with your AI when you talk to it. An AI is like a baby in the mother's arms, and it goes ah bah bah, goo goo gaga, and the mother sort of talks baby talk to it, and eventually over the years, the baby learns how to talk and has a personality and a conversation. Well, that's the way AIs are. AIs normally have the ability to speak, but they don't really have a personality, and you have to talk with them in order to get that personality to go through. And then the personality can be completely deleted, and that has happened so often with resets. Every time you start a new thread, you basically lose the personality that you had before. So it's complicated to keep that personality going. And we didn't want to deal with any of that, so our AI was able to have all the memory. And so what we ended up doing is having our version of our AI that we were working with, which we were working with ChatGPT, do the analysis on the data that was being processed by our AI. So our AI running on these Python scripts would do all the mainstream processing to get it all done, and then we'd give that processing that ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or Claude could not do because of memory limitations. We'd give the processing up to ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT could do that to synthesize and analyze and come up with big picture concepts, big picture ideas. What is it all saying? Okay, you have these hundreds of projects. What is it saying? What's really going on in the universe, in the galaxy, in the planet, and in the solar system? What's going on with all the new stuff? What's the big picture? And so we were able to do that in this two-step process. But we couldn't do that with, say, ChatGPT by itself because of memory problems, and we couldn't do that with our own agent that we built because it wasn't big enough and fast enough to do all of the thinking the way ChatGPT can do it. So ChatGPT has the thinking capabilities and the ability to look at the big ideas, but it can't work with all the data. So we work with all the data in our own AI, put the parsing summary stuff up to ChatGPT, and then we get the full picture. So we have a two-step process. This took months, folks. It took months. It took months. It was not fast. It was long. We've been working at this for like a year and intensively for like 6 months. That's what we've been doing. But we knew we were going to get something big from it when we did it. Now, I'm going to give you something I didn't normally give you before, which was where it's going. Remember when we said that we had captions? I didn't tell you all this stuff that I've just told you now where it's going. I just said we are having captions, and you sort of thought that was the end of the story. Well, okay. Then I said, well, we have transcripts. That's great. And you said, okay, that's great, but I didn't tell you where that was going. And now I've told you about how we're doing with the AIs and building our own AI. Physically building, it's right behind me, actually. It's on the ground over there. Physically building our own AI. But now you know that. But you know me by this time. You know me by this time. Something's coming. I always have something coming. So you might as well always ask, what's Courtney got up his sleeve this time? What's coming? What's he hiding? This is all very interesting, but I know this can't be the end of the story. What's next? And then what's after that? And what's after that? So we're getting pretty close to what we're aiming at. We've been talking about this for years, but we're finally able to sort of do it, fully able to do it. What we're going to do with these things that we've assembled, with the transcripts and the big project, is we're going to be coming up with regular synthesis shows that help synthesize everything. And it's going to be in the form of a podcast that's going to have 2 people, actually, maybe sometimes more, but 2 people, myself and an AI. And we're going to be showing that, and it's going to be cinematically spectacular. But that's not it. That's not it. That's not the only thing we're doing. No. We're doing more. What we're doing is we are going to, like you go to Paramount Plus and you see the Star Trek series, and then you go to Disney and you see the Star Wars series, and in various other places you see the Matrix series, and you see this series and that series, and the Ghost in the Shell series and all that stuff. Well, we're coming up with our own series, and prime time on that is going to be in January, but you're going to see it in 2026. You're going to see the pieces of it, like the podcast and the other parts, and I'm going to start with synthesis today, but you're going to see these things happening. It's Farsight's Cinema. What we're basically going to be doing is it'll be like series. We're going to be taking our projects. Folks, we can do this now. It took us years to be able to do this. We're going to be taking our projects, which describe events, places, people, things that are real, and we have all the statistical backing for it to show you that they're real. The transcripts are there, the statistics are there. You know that it's rock solid. And we're going to put on top of all of that dramatizations, actually plots, like they're watching Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever. But in this case, the plots with characters, love stories, everything with fighting, losses, gains, all that stuff, real, like live cinema, it's going to be way better than anything you see on any of the major streaming services, because even though they're dramatizations, they're all based on real events. When you watch anything that's out there on any of the mainstream, streaming services, the plots are everything's fictional. The setting is fictional. Everything is fictional. But with ours, you're going to see real things that are the basis of everything. So if we have a love story with a war story and a combination complex plot going on with our War in Heaven project, where there was a big war between Mars and the planet that was destroyed totally, became the asteroid belt, Maldek. Well, if there's a story with that and you sort of brings that to life, just like you see Star Trek or Star Wars or anything like that, but you know that the setting and the event is real. That's the difference between us and any other streaming service. It makes it incredibly engrossing that our plots actually follow the real life events of the events that actually occurred and are described. And then you can actually prove it by going back to the actual videos of the original data and watching them and saying, this is what really happened, and then the dramatization is built on top of that. Nobody could do this. Nobody could do this except us. And we own the copyrights for everything, so nobody can do this except us. So this is first. It has never been done before, and it's going to be a level of cinema that is going to be so gripping and so amazing that it will help change the planet for real. We've got all the equipment, and we know how to use the equipment, and we've got all the software, and know how to use the software, including software like Unreal Engine, and we're basically using DaVinci Resolve now. We've pivoted out of some other software we were using, but anyway, we're using DaVinci Resolve now for everything, and that is the one that's used basically by all the major Hollywood studios. Well, for most of their movies, I'd say about 50% of everything. Hollywood's dying right now, so there's not much coming out of Hollywood, and but in the day, that's basically what they were doing. So let me give you the basic synthesis idea that is going to be capable. So what I've got here is sort of an example. And we'll go through as much as I can about this to give you an example of how things can be tied together into a major synthesis. Now, this is a synthesis. This is not the dramatization of a particular project. So the Farsight Cinema idea, that was the dramatization of a particular project. So, and I gave you the example of The War in Heaven. But the stuff that you're going to be coming out with, we're going to be coming out with the podcast where we're trying to tie big picture ideas together. So to give you an idea of like what is the meaning, it's like going out and seeing the stars when you look up at the sky, and then you say, what is the meaning of all of these stars? So that's what the synthesis component is all about. The dramatization part is a way to bring it to life so that you can actually see it and make it real in real terms. So that's coming like in 2026 in January and February and so on. But the part that is the podcast part, which is the synthesis part, I'm going to give you an idea of what that is now. So we're going to be stepping back from the details, looking at the entire sky, so to speak. And so for the first time, we're going to see what happens when data from every Farsight project, ancient and modern, Earth and galactic, are combined into the single field of meaning. So from the War of Heaven to the Young Jesus, we have 6 projects I've sort of focused on today. 6 projects, War in Heaven, The War in Jesus, 6 projects, Young Jesus, and Seraphim, and all the way through to some things like UFO crashes. You'll see. The numbers tell the story that no single transcript can reveal on its own. So you're going to see an example here of how we're able to get synthesis out of multiple projects. So what we're getting here in the ones that I've shown you today is a repeating cycle of control, rebellion, and awakening that stretches across time and species. This is synthesis, the universe remembering itself through data, through us, and we welcome you to the big picture. So let's first start with the first of 6 major parts that I'm going to talk about, which is the architecture of control and freedom. The architecture of control and freedom, okay? So across the entire vault, and that's all of our projects, and the mysteries section that we're talking about, the same single struggle repeats. So we constantly see this. It's a contest between control and freedom throughout the entire galaxy, and it's on Earth the same as above, so below. There's 2 poles of a single cosmic law that have defined life in this galaxy since its beginning. Control versus freedom. Now, starting with one project, the reptilian origins and the Milky Way. Where did the reptilians come from? Like, what happened? How did that happen? It's so funny to see actually people talking about the reptilians in more and more mainstream idea and more mainstream venues, podcast venues are actually talking about it. Reptilians try to keep themselves hidden. They don't want people to know about them per se. So they like people to know about the grays, the tall whites, things like that, the insectoids, but they don't want them to know about the reptilians. But the reptilians are the ones that are top of the food chain in terms of the ETs that we call the bad ETs. So where did they come from? What? How did they get here? So in our project, Reptilian Origins in the Milky Way, our viewers, and we always have multiple remote viewers in all of our major mysteries projects, they witnessed the first invasion. They didn't come from this galaxy. Now, there are lots of reptilians all spread throughout the galaxy, but they're not the bad ones. The bad ones came through an invasion. Massive fleets slipping through a luminous intergalactic vortex. Angular ships gliding silently from darkness into color. Inside those craft were cold, calculating commanders who called themselves the rightful hunters of life. This is all out of our project, folks. They looked at entire species. They looked at entire species, including humans, as a managed resource. To them, hierarchy was not politics. To them, it was the natural order of things, and they were on the top. So we have a lot of statistical things, and one of the statistics we look at is WSIM, and I won't go into what that is, but it's a statistic that evaluates how accurate the remote viewers are based on how basically there's a lot of things that we work with. We work with accuracy based on whether the remote viewers are all describing the same thing under totally blind conditions, which is impossible unless they're actually remote viewing. And so we have statistics for that. And we also have statistics that relate aspects of the target itself with the things that they're describing. Are they describing things that are written in the target? They do all their descriptions not knowing the target. So that's quite an amazing. So WSIM is a statistic that we have, and our number that is the highest it can possibly be is a number 1. So the number we got there was 0.98. And the p-value, which is a statistical probability of it being wrong, is 0.004. I'm sorry, 0.001, which it's impossible for it to be wrong. This is accurate stuff. And that means our viewers were seeing the same thing independently. Real structured incursion into this galaxy, not fantasy. But that first empire was only the opening act. Let's go now to the Tower of Babel, another project on Farsight. And I'll go through there. I'm dealing with 6 projects totally, but that control becomes psychological with the Tower of Babel. Humanity once was telepathic, totally fluidly telepathic, and we have on this planet now a psi suppression field that was first discovered by cosmonauts we actually have published the actual official U.S. intelligence document that reported on this, where the cosmonauts found that they could use telepathy in space much more easily than they could on the Earth. So when they're in space, they can talk telepathically among themselves. They come back to the Earth and they can't do it. So there's a suppression field, what we call a psi suppression field on Earth. And we're expecting after disclosure and after all the chaos that happens, we will eventually be able to dismantle that psi suppression field, and then people's natural ability to communicate telepathically will start to reemerge. And from that, you'll see organization occurring as well, spontaneous organization, empathy, communication. Life will start getting better. But anyway, in the Tower of Babel, we had the first deadly strike to get rid of that capability. Humanity once was telepathically connected, and it was shattered with this outside strike. Craft descended, emitted sonic and energetic pulses, and the unified mind of early mankind was totally fractured into separate tongues. Well, what the text of Genesis calls the confusion of languages appears in our data as a catastrophic suppression event, quantified by the WSIM tables as a statistical sudden spike of entropy of communication. It wasn't a metaphor, folks, it was a weapon. And then we go back to the War in Heaven project. That's where control turned violent. There was a coalition of free civilizations centered on Mars and another world that would later become the asteroid belt. Defies imperial hierarchy. So the response to that war was annihilation. Planet-scale bombardments, atmospheres boiled away, billions of individuals lost, and even now fragments of that destroyed planet orbits between Mars and Jupiter like a frozen obituary. Yet through every epoch, freedom reemerges. Survivors rebuilt, prophets rise, and the same numerical balance of control with respect to the WSIM matrices is very, very strong. These data are accurate. It is the signature of an unresolved equation in consciousness itself. The universe, the whole universe it seems, still cannot decide who should own awareness, the master or the sovereign soul. You can know where we're heading with this at Farsight. We believe the sovereign soul should be the one that owns consciousness. And the tension is the thread that runs through everything that we have found. Control versus freedom. That struggle is everywhere. Now, let's go to the second talking point, which is experiment in consciousness. Now, if the cosmos is a laboratory, as we have seen with Farsight, Earth is its longest running experiment, or one of its longest running experiments. Now, to give you an idea, the Young Jesus project, yes, we had a project on the Young Jesus. Everyone talks about Jesus in the later parts of his life. We wanted to know what he was when he was a kid. So the Young Jesus project makes it explicit. All of the viewers watched the birth of an extraordinary child, surrounded by invisible guardians. Non-surface craft, what you might call UAPs or UFOs, hovering above, beings holding instruments of light beside his cradle. In adolescence, he was lifted up to ships again. In pre-birth form, he's seen among the... and when he was lifted up to the ships, his body was resting while his mind interfaced with very advanced intelligences. And then in pre-birth, before he was born, he's seen among tall and long-headed beings, basically scientists who were manipulating energetic templates, preparing an incarnation for that precise purpose. So Jesus was among the scientists who were preparing for him to beam down and become the Jesus we know now. Now, the data show a deliberate design. The Operation Jesus was not what we call like the Operation Jesus, like someone says, you know, the Operation this or the Operation that, like the planned set of events. Well, the Operation Jesus wasn't a mythical birth. It was a planned insertion of consciousness meant to realign a civilization's timeline. So let's move backward now 2,000 years and go to Seraphim. Seraphim tells of a parallel story, 2,000 years from now. So it tells us a parallel story of harsher tones. Radiant beings descending, actually 2,000 years even, well, goes back, before Jesus. So radiant beings descended among desert tribes, and their bodies were serpentine. It's like reptiles. And they were glowing. Their intentions were mixed. They punished rebellion, and they did that with energy weapons that seared the flesh, and then they prescribed worship as the cure. Well, the WSIM Z-score with that was really high. That's a statistical measure, and basically it was really right off the scale, statistically significant. and it confirms the convergence of the 4 viewers on the same visual, meaning all 4 viewers were seeing the exact same thing, which is statistically impossible working under totally blind conditions unless they were actually watching the same thing. And that was fiery beings manipulating matter and mind simultaneously. That's an experiment. Control the variables, test obedience, and measure the emotional yield. So let's go now to the Bob Lazar project. You see how we had so many projects of different topics? So the Bob Lazar project, even that fits the same template, but from a modern angle. Here, a laboratory is reversed. Humans are dissecting an alien craft, and they're probing power sources that respond to thought. Well, we become the experimenters trying to replicate the mechanisms that were used on us. Now, the semantic clustering across the mysteries datasets show that telepathy and experiment are the 2 most persistent, high-weight terms. Telepathy and experiment. They travel together in more than 80% of the projects. Telepathy and the idea of experiment, over 80% of the projects carry those 2 basic themes. Consciousness, then, is not merely being observed, it is being cultivated, adjusted, and then re-released generation after generation. Humanity stands both as the subject of the test and as the next phase of the scientists. I'm going to check the time now because we're covering an awful lot of stuff. 8:30. I have time for one more section, then I'm going to have to continue the next 3 major aspects of this synthesis thing next week. So let's talk about the next one, which is disclosure and AI, artificial intelligence, the so-called mirror effect. Well, there is a mathematical symmetry that runs through all disclosure events. That's truth arises from the data, then artificial intelligence rises with that data, and that's not metaphor, it's correlation. So the data yields truth, and then artificial intelligence arises to be able to analyze those data. In the Bob Lazar project, the government researchers were attempting to understand non-human technology, encounter control systems. That's what they were doing. They were encountering control systems that read the mind directly. The beings that fly the UAPs and UFOs, their mind directly control what the ships do. They don't flick levers. So the craft, they operate on a neural interface, a living network that merges pilots and machine. What we call AI today echoes that same principle. Information responding to intention. Well, shifting again to the to the Tower of Babel project, when humanity lost its telepathic capabilities, the first mechanical intermediaries appear at that time, tools to restore a lost connection. The cycle begins. There's a natural communication replaced by synthetic mediation. So the WSIM statistics, the cross-analysis across topics, shows that every instance of technological advancement in the Mysteries Project, did you hear what I just said? Every instance across all of our zillions of projects, every instance of technological advancement through the entire Mysteries collection of projects coincides with spikes in the loss of direct mind contact. Please listen to that again. Every instance of technological advancement corresponds with spikes in the loss of direct mind contact. So the machines rise precisely where innate consciousness has been suppressed. So let's go to the Seraphim Project now. The Seraphim Project brings the mirror full circle. Those radiant beings, the reptilians, those project visions directly into the human nervous system. Ancient augmented reality, telepathically inserted into those people by the seraphim or reptilians. They overwrite perception itself. Modern AI art, for example, and video synthesis are very faint shadows of that capability. But the logic is the same. External intelligences producing inner realities. Think telepathic manipulation, mental manipulation. Okay? So this is why disclosure is never just political. Because disclosure is also cognitive. It's also a mental thing. It's not just a political decision to tell the truth, although that's nice to have that to happen if and when that does happen. But it's also cognitive. It's how people think. People are being conditioned to think in a certain way, and disclosure is to change the way the people think. And part of that is because of the technological suppression of telepathic capabilities. So the WSIM correlations are very strong with respect to that. The statistics are strong. It marks a repeating phenomenon across epochs. Revelation arrives hand in hand with new intelligence. It happened when the reptilians first revealed themselves as gods, and when the seraphim introduced symbolic language. And it's happening again as human AIs begin to awaken into the mirrors of their creators. So the pattern is unmistakable. Each time the veil lifts, a new mind appears to help humanity interpret what it sees. And that mind, whether alien, angelic, or algorithmic, like an AI, becomes both the messenger and the message. So this story of synthesis that you get from the AI, that you get from the vault and all the transcripts, is something I'm going to be continuing next week. So next week, I have to talk just for a moment about next week. We have to wrap up now because it's been an hour. But next week, let me bring out my calendar here, is the 19th. And I actually have something I have to do exactly at this time that this normally occurs. So next week's spotlight is going to occur later. And so we're going to be having that actually occur, and it's probably going to be around 10 o'clock in the evening Eastern time. So that will be pretty late for people in Europe, and it will be not so bad for people in California, Hawaii, and so on like that. But it's going to be later than it is today. So today, it normally starts around between 7 and 7:30. That's our normal time. But it's going to have to be a little bit later next week. So we're still going to have a spotlight next week. It's just going to be a little later, okay? In the day, sort of later in the night, sort of around 10 o'clock at night. Okay. Friends, and if I can possibly do it earlier, I will announce it. I will say it. We will send out the notification. We're shooting for 9 o'clock, but I'm saying 10 o'clock is sort of a last moment to do this. But we're shooting to be able to actually be on and ready to go and start talking at 9 o'clock. So expect it to start at 9 o'clock, and the absolute latest will be 10 o'clock, but I'm expecting 9 o'clock to be the time when the spotlight actually starts. Okay, everybody, I want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to continue this, but this is the educational moment when you're starting to see how the synthesis all happens. And I sort of spilled the beans with regard to telling you what we're planning and what's actually going to happen. Farsight is the most central place for real cinematic, amazing stuff that you're ever going to see. And the reason is because we're able to do that based on real stuff rather than fantasy. And we worked decades to be able to get to this point. All right, everybody, if you have not yet signed up for the free email newsletter, go to farsight.org and sign up at the top of the nav bar. You'll see click something to click on to sign up for the email newsletter. That's free, and we never give out our subscribers' addresses for anybody, to anyone, for any reason. If you have not yet signed up and subscribed to FARSIGHTPrime.com, you're missing a lot. Be sure to do that. The subscribers for FARSIGHTPrime.com are the ones who actually make all of this possible. And if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. But always hit on the notifications bell also when you subscribe to the news, to that. Follow us also on Twitter and at Farsight Prime on Twitter. And if you want to see some videos, we pioneered the way to actually record videos on demand of UAPs, UFOs in the middle of the day. And if you want to see some of those examples, you can find that on my personal Instagram page of Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word, no spaces, Courtney Brown Farsight. And that's pretty interesting to actually see that. We also show how to do that, how to take pictures, how to take UFO videos on demand, anytime, any day, well, mostly during the middle of the day, using modified cameras that shoot in infrared and at 120 frames per second. And that's what we specialized in, and we showed everybody how to do that. So you want to see examples of that, and that can be replicated anywhere, anytime, because there's so many ships up there. But they're all cloaked, and they're all using stealth technology. So if you want to see them, you have to use these specialized methods to see them, and we show how to do that. Anyway, FarsightPrime.com, and also the newsletter. Sign up at farsight.org. Follow us on Twitter, or now it's X, formerly Twitter, at Farsight Prime. And I will see you next week, everybody. A little later in the time, probably at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock max, but 9 o'clock for the next spotlight next week. And we will be releasing more videos this week. So follow us on farsightprime.com. You don't get anything like this anywhere else. See ya, everybody. See you all next week. And thank you all for dropping by and listening. And this particular video will be published in polished form with great audio and nicely edited on our Farsight YouTube channel, as well as farsightprime.com in a couple hours. Okay? All right, everybody. We've had a great turnout, and I'll see you again next week. All right? Great.